the networks of the DNC, of John Podesta and other individuals stole information and then disseminated that information. Is that a fair characterization of the conclusions of the intelligence community?
Yes, sir.
And did the intelligence community ever do an analysis as to whether the dissemination of that adverse information in a closely fought election had any effect on the American electorate?
No, sir. The U.S. intelligence community does not do assessments of
course not.
policy
That's not your job.
Yes, sir.
The fact is, those of us who go through campaigns know that's actually something we probably have a little bit more understanding of. Let me just ask this question then. Was there any equivalent dissemination of adverse information stolen from the RNC or individuals associated with the Trump campaign?
No.
Thank you. Director Comey, in the remaining minutes here, I appreciate your frankness on the topic of an ongoing investigation and appreciate your inability to go too much further than you went. But I do want to ask you a question to try to clear up some confusion. This committee, of course, is engaged in an investigation about links, as you said, between the Trump campaign and the Russians, should there be any possible collusion. We've had a number of statements very early in the investigation that there was no evidence of collusion. This is still very early in our investigation. Is it fair to say that you're still relatively early in your investigation?
It's hard to say because I don't know how much longer it will take, but we've been doing this. This investigation began in late July, so for a counterintelligence investigation, that's a fairly short period of time.
So you use the word coordination, which to me suggests that you are in fact investigating whether there was coordination between U.S. persons and the Russians. Is it fair for me to assume that we shouldn't simply dismiss the possibility that there was coordination or collusion between the Russian efforts and U.S. persons as an investigatory body?
All I can tell you is what we're investigating, which includes whether there was any coordination between people associated with the Trump campaign and the Russians.
Okay, thank you. I'll yield the remaining time to the ranking member.
I will yield the remaining time in this period to Representative Sewell.
Thank you. So, with respect to the coordination, Director Comey, I just wanted to continue this line of questioning. Can you say with any specificity what kind of coordination or contacts you're looking at in your investigation generally when confronted with something like this?
I can't.
Can you discuss whether or not there was any knowledge by any Trump-related person and the Russians?
I can't.
So, with respect to any investigation, ongoing investigation, whether the specificity of the person, U.S. person or otherwise, you can't comment on any of that?
Correct.
Okay. Can you characterize what the nature of your investigation generally, when you do an investigation of this sort, can you talk a little bit about the process generally?
Not a whole lot. I can tell you we use our great people. We coordinate with our brothers and sisters in other parts of the intelligence community to see what they may know from around the world that might be useful to us. And we use all the different tools and techniques that we use in all of our investigations. That's probably the most, I'm not sure that's useful to you, but that's the most I can say.
How long does a counterintelligence investigation like this usually take? You said that it started in July.
There is no usually. It's impossible to say, frankly.
I yield back my time.
Thank you, Ms. Sewell. We'll go back to, I'll yield myself 15 minutes and we'll go back to Mr. Gowdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Comey, you and I were discussing the felonious dissemination of classified material during the last round. Is there an exception in the law for current or former U.S. officials who request anonymity?
To release classified information?
Yes, sir.
No.
Is there an exception in the law for reporters who want to break a story?
Well, that's a harder question as to whether a reporter incurs criminal liability by publishing classified information. and one probably beyond my ken. I'm not as good a lawyer as Mr. Schiff said I used to be.
Well, I don't know about that, but the statute does use the word published, doesn't it?
It does, but that's a question I know the Department of Justice has struggled with through administration after administration.
I know the department struggled with it, the Fourth Circuit struggled with it, lots of people have struggled with it, but you're not aware of an exception in the current dissemination of classified information statute that carves out an exception for reporters.
No, I'm not aware of anything carved out in the statute. I don't think a reporter's been prosecuted, certainly in my lifetime, though.
Well, there have been a lot of statutes at bar in this investigation for which no one's ever been prosecuted or convicted, and that does not keep people from discussing those statutes, namely the Logan Act. In theory, how would reporters know a U.S. citizen made a telephone call to an agent of foreign power?
How would they know legally?
Yes.
If it was declassified and then discussed in a judicial proceeding or a congressional hearing, something like that.
And assume none of those facts are at play, how would they know?
Someone told them who shouldn't have told them.
How would a reporter know about the existence of intercepted phone calls?
Well, same thing. In a legitimate way, through an appropriate proceeding where there's been declassification. In any other way, in an illegitimate way.
How would reporters know if a transcript existed of an intercepted communication?
Same answer. The only legitimate way would be through a proceeding, appropriate proceeding. The illegitimate way would be somebody told them who shouldn't have told them.
What does the term mask mean in the concept of FISA and other surveillance programs?
As Director Rogers explained, it's our practice, approved by the FISA court, of removing the names of U.S. persons to protect their privacy and their identity unless it hits certain exceptions. So masking means, as Mike Rogers said, I'll often see an intelligence report from NSA that will say U.S. person number 1, U.S. person number 2, U.S. person number 3, and there's no further identification on the document.
Admiral Rogers said there are 20 people within the NSA that are part of the unmasking process. How many people within the FBI are part of the unmasking process?
I don't know for sure as I sit here. Surely more, given the nature of the FBI's work. We come into contact with U.S. persons a whole lot more than the NSA does because we may be conducting, we only conduct our operations in the United States to collect electronic surveillance, to conduct electronic surveillance. So I can find out the exact number. I don't know it as I sit here.
Well, I think, Director Comey, given the fact that you and I agree this is critical, vital, indispensable, a similar program is coming up for reauthorization this fall with a pretty strong headwind right now, it would be nice to know the universe of people who have the power to unmask a U.S. citizen's name, because that might provide something of a roadmap to investigate who might have actually disseminated a masked U.S. citizen's name.
Sure, the number is relevant, but what I hope the American people will realize is the number is important, but the culture behind it is, in fact, more important. The training, the rigor, the discipline. We are obsessive about FISA and the FBI for reasons I hope make sense to this committee, but everything that's FISA has to be labeled in such a way to warn people, this is FISA. We treat this in a special way. So we can get you the number, but I want to assure you the culture of the FBI and the NSA around how we treat U.S. person information is obsessive, and I mean that in a good way.
Director Comey, I am not arguing with you, and I do agree the culture is important. But if there are 100 people who have the ability to unmask and the knowledge of a previously masked name, then that's 100 different potential sources of investigation. And the smaller the number is, the easier your investigation is. So the number is relevant. I concede the culture is relevant. NSA, FBI, what other U.S. government agencies have the authority to unmask a U.S. citizen's name?
Well, I think all agencies that collect information pursuant to FISA have what are called standard minimization procedures, which are approved by the FISA court that govern how they will treat U.S. person information. So I know the NSA does, I know the CIA does, obviously the FBI does. I don't know for sure beyond that.
How about the Department of how about Maine Justice?
I mean, Maine Justice, I think, does have standard minimization procedures.
All right, so that's 4. The NSA, FBI, CIA, Maine Justice. Does the White House have the authority to unmask a U.S. citizen's name?
I think other elements of the government that are consumers of our products can ask the collectors to unmask. The unmasking resides with those who collected the information. And so if Mike Rogers' folks collected something and they send it to me in a report and it says U.S. person number 1, and it's important for the FBI to know who that is, our request will go back to them. The White House can make similar requests of the FBI or of NSA, but they don't on their own collect, and so they can't on their own unmask. I got that about right?
No, that's correct.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm getting at, Director Comey, is you say it's vital, you say it's critical, you say it's indispensable. We both know it's a threat to the reauthorization of 702 later on this fall. And oh, by the way, it's also a felony punishable by up to 10 years. So how would you begin your investigation, assuming for the sake of argument that a U.S. citizen's name appeared in the Washington Post and the New York Times unlawfully? Where would you begin that investigation?
Well, I'm not going to talk about any particular investigation.
That's why I said in theory.
You would start by figuring out, so who are the suspects? Who touched the information that you've concluded ended up unlawfully in the newspaper, and start with that universe, and then use investigative tools and techniques to see if you can eliminate people or include people as more serious suspects.
Do you know whether Director Clapper knew the name of the U.S. citizen that appeared in the New York Times and Washington Post?
I can't say in this forum because, again, I don't want to confirm that there was classified information in the newspaper.
Would he have access to an unmasked name?
In some circumstances, sure. He was the Director of National Intelligence, but I'm not talking about the particular.
Would Director Brennan have access to an unmasked U.S. citizen's name?
In some circumstances, yes.
Would National Security Advisor Susan Rice have access to an unmasked U.S. citizen's name?
I think yes, in general, and any other national security advisor would, I think, as a matter of their ordinary course of their business.
Would former White House advisor Ben Rhodes have access to an unmasked U.S. citizen's name?
I don't know the answer to that.
Would former Attorney General Loretta Lynch have access to an unmasked U.S. citizen's name?
In general, yes, as would any Attorney General.
So that would also include acting AG Sally Yates?
Same answer.
Did you brief President Obama on, well, I'll just ask you, did you brief President Obama on any calls involving Michael Flynn?
I'm not going to get into either that particular case, that matter, or any conversations I had with the President, so I can't answer that.
Well, Director Comey, there's been some speculation this morning on motive. I'm not all that interested in motive. First of all, it's really hard to prove. Secondarily, you never have to prove it. But I get that people want to know. I get the jury always wants to know why. I think you and I can agree there are a couple of reasons that you would not have to unlawfully, feloniously disseminate classified material. It certainly wasn't done to help an ongoing criminal investigation because you already had the information, didn't you?
Again, I can't answer in the context of this particular matter.
How about in theory? Is there something a reporter would have access to that the head of the FBI would not?
It's hard for me to answer. I would hope not when it relates to the
I would
FBI's
hope not too, since it's part of our surveillance programs. I would hope that you had access to everything as the head of the world's premier law enforcement agency. I would hope that you had it all. So if you had it all, the motive couldn't have been to help you because you already had it. And Admiral Rogers, the motive couldn't have been to help you because you already had it. So in the universe of possible motives for the felonious dissemination of classified material, we could rule out wanting to help the intelligence communities and the law enforcement communities. Those are two motives that are gone now. That leaves some more nefarious motives. Is the investigation into the leak of classified information, has it begun yet?
I can't say because I don't want to confirm that that was classified information.
Well, I don't want to quarrel with you, Director Comey, and I do understand that you cannot ordinarily confirm or deny the existence of an investigation. But you did it this morning citing DOJ policy given the gravity of the fact pattern. Would you not agree that surveillance programs that are critical, indispensable, vital to our national security, some of which are up for reauthorization this fall, that save American lives and prevent terrorist attacks also rises to the level of important?
I think those programs are vital, and leaks of information collected pursuant to court order under those programs are terrible, and as I said in my opening statement, should be taken very, very seriously. What I don't ever want to do is compound what bad people have done and confirm something that's in the newspaper, because sometimes the newspaper gets it right. There's a whole lot of wrong information allegedly about classified activities that's in the newspaper. We don't call them and correct them either. That's another big challenge, but we just don't go anywhere near it because we don't want to help and compound the offense that was committed.
I understand that, Director Comey, and I'm trying really hard not to get you to discuss the facts at bar. But some of the words that appeared in this public reporting include the word transcript, which has a very unique use in the matters that you and I are discussing this morning. That is a very unique use of that word. Wiretap has a very specific meaning. The name of a U.S. citizen that was supposed to statutorily be protected is no longer protected. So some of this reporting, let's assume 90% of it is inaccurate. That other 10% is still really, really important. And to the extent that you can rely on the dates in either the Washington Post or the New York Times, we are talking about February of this year is when the reporting first took place. So we're a month and a half or 2 months into something that you and I agree is incredibly important and also happens to be a felony. So I'm just simply asking you to assure the American people, you've already assured them you take it really seriously. Can you assure them that it is going to be investigated?
I can't, but I hope people watching know how seriously we take leaks of classified information, but I don't want to confirm it by saying that we're investigating it. And I'm sorry I have to draw that line. I just think that's the right way to be.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you, Director Comey. It is, we're going to discuss a lot of important things today. Whether Russia attempted to influence our democratic process is incredibly important. Whether they sought to influence it is a separate analysis, incredibly important. The motive behind that interference and influence, incredibly important. Our U.S. response, incredibly important. Some of that may rise to the level of a crime, some of it does not rise to the level of a crime. One thing you and I agree on is the felonious dissemination of classified material most definitely is a crime. So I would ask you, and I understand some of the procedures that you are up against, I would humbly ask you to seek authority from whomever you need to seek authority from. Because I'm going to finish the same way I started. This is an agreement between the American people and its government. We, the American people, give certain powers to government to keep us safe. And when those powers are misused, and the motive is not criminal investigations or national security, then I'll bet you my fellow citizens are rethinking their side of the equation. Because that U.S. citizen could be them next time. It could be you. It could be me. It could be anyone until we start seriously investigating and prosecuting what Congress thought was serious enough to attach a 10-year felony to. With that, I would yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Can I just add a response to what you said? I agree with you, Mr. Gowdy. Two things folks at home should know. First, an unauthorized disclosure of FISA is an extraordinary people, and the federal judges that oversee our work is vital. And second, that this conversation has nothing to do with 702. Folks often mix them together. 702 is about targeting non-U.S. persons overseas. Pursuant to the FISA statute, the FBI can apply to collect electronic surveillance in the United States, but it's a different thing from 702. The conversation you and I are just having is about this, which is vital and important, but I just didn't want to leave folks confused.
Director Comey, you are 100% correct, and I am 100% correct in saying that that is a distinction that doesn't make a difference to most of the people watching television. You are exactly correct. What we are reauthorizing this fall has nothing to do with what we are discussing, other than it is another government program where the people consent to allow government to pursue certain things with the explicit promise it will be protected. So you're right, they're different. But in the eyes of people watching, it is the U.S. government officials leaking the name of a U.S. citizen, and if it can happen here, it may happen there. Trust me, you and I both want to see it reauthorized. It is in jeopardy if we don't get this resolved.
Gentlemen, our time's expired. I'll yield 15 minutes to Mr. Schiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to follow up with a few questions about Roger Stone that I had started with earlier before I pass it to my colleagues. Director Comey, are you aware that Roger Stone played a role in the Trump campaign?
I'm not going to talk about any particular person here today, Mr. Schiff.
I'm going to continue to ask these questions because, among other things, I want to make sure you are aware of these facts, whether you're able to comment on them or not. Have you read press reports where Mr. Stone proudly boasts of engaging in political dirty tricks?
To give you the same answer, sir.
I mentioned before that Mr. Stone was in direct communication with the creature of Russian GRU, Guccifer II, and that's something the intelligence assessment talked about, the role of Guccifer II. Mr. Stone, on August 17th, are you aware, received a communication from Guccifer II that said, quote, "I'm pleased to say that you are great. Please tell me if I can help you anyhow. It would be a great pleasure to me." Are you aware of that communication from essentially Russian GRU through Guccifer to Mr. Stone?
I have to give you the same answer.
Are you aware that Mr. Stone also stated publicly that he was in direct communication with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks?
Same answer.
Are you aware that Mr. Stone also claimed that he was in touch with an intermediary of Mr. Assange?
Same answer.
This question I think you can answer. Do you know whether the Russian intelligence services dealt directly with WikiLeaks or whether they too used an intermediary?
We assessed they used some kind of cutout. They didn't deal directly with WikiLeaks, in contrast to DC Leaks and Guccifer 2.0.
In early October, are you aware that Mr. Stone tweeted, "I have total confidence that my hero Julian Assange will educate the American people soon"? Are you aware of that tweet?
I'm back to my original same answer.
And are you aware that it was only days later that WikiLeaks released the Podesta emails?
Same answer.
I'm going to yield now to Mr. Himes.
Thank you, Mr. Schiff. I note that we're going through the 90-minute mark in this hearing, so let me step back a second and just review the topics, because there's a lot on the table. I think my friends on the Republican side will get no argument from this side on the importance of investigating, prosecuting leaks. Leaks are a threat to our national security, whether they're perpetrated by Edward Snowden, whether they're perpetrated by people outside the White House, or perhaps, as we have seen in the last 60 days, maybe from people inside the White House. But, Mr. Comey, if I can use your phrase, intense public interest, there is intense public interest in the fact that our new president will attack anyone and everyone. He will attack the cast of Hamilton. He will attack Chuck Schumer. He will attack our allies, Mexico, Australia, Germany. He will attack the intelligence community which you lead, associating you with McCarthyism and with Nazism. But there's one person and one country which is immune, which is inoculated from any form of presidential attack, no matter what the behavior. No matter if there's a violation of the INF nuclear treaty, no matter if Vladimir Putin kills political opponents, the new president defends, obfuscates, does not attack. And the people around the president, Michael Flynn, Jeff Sessions, Carter Page, Paul Manafort, have an odd connection to Russia, a series of odd connections. We all campaign. I don't think any of our campaign people have connections with a foreign power, much less one that is an adversary of the United States. And further, apart from these weird links, without exception, the individuals I quoted have dissembled or misled, maybe even lied about the nature of those connections until the political pressure has gotten to a point where they have been fired or recused in the case of the Attorney General. So I want to look briefly at one of these individuals. And Director Comey, I understand your constraints, but let me ask a couple of questions regardless. Paul Manafort, who is Roger Stone's business partner and Trump's former campaign manager, I want to ask a few questions about him. First, Director Comey, can you tell me what the Foreign Agents Registration Act is?
Sure, not in an expert way, but it's a statute that requires people who are acting as agents of a non-U.S. government to register with the United States.
Right. So the National Security Division of the Department of Justice writes, this is their manual, the purpose of FARA, as it is known, is to ensure that the U.S. government and the people of the United States are informed of the source of information and the identity of persons attempting to influence U.S. public opinion, policy, and laws, unquote. Would you agree that guarding against foreign espionage or foreign influence measures falls under this heading?
Yes.
In general, is willful violation or failure to register pursuant to this law in some circumstances a crime?
I believe it is. I'm not an expert on FARA, but I believe it is.
And it could lead certainly to counterintelligence concerns, right?
Yes.
Now, Paul Manafort, as reported in the New York Times and other outlets, and his deputy Rick Gates ran a campaign in Washington to lobby government officials and push positive press coverage of pro-Russian Ukrainian officials. Paul Manafort began officially working for former Ukrainian President Yanukovych at least as far back as 2007, according to the Washington Post. The lobbying was only discovered by Ukraine's new National Anti-Corruption Bureau, which found secret ledgers in Kiev indicating almost $13 million in undisclosed cash payments from Ukrainian government coffers to Paul Manafort for lobbying done between 2007 and 2012 for Mr. Yanukovych. Director Comey, did Paul Manafort ever register as a foreign agent under FARA?
That's not something I can comment on.
Whether he registered or not is not something that you can comment on?
No.
Okay. Paul Manafort was, however, Donald Trump's campaign manager in July of 2016, correct?
Mr. Himes, I really don't want to get into answering questions about any individual U.S. person. So
Okay.
it's obvious from the public record, but I don't want to start down the road of answering questions about somebody.
Okay, well, I think the facts would show that he never did register. But as the ranking member pointed out, it perhaps should come as no surprise that the Republican platform, which was drafted at the Republican convention in July of 2016, underwent a pretty significant change with respect to the American response to Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine and their aggression in that country. It appears, from our standpoint, that we had perhaps somebody who should have registered under FARA pulling the strings there. There's more, though, and I don't know how much you'll be able to comment on this, but I want to just explore for a second the nature of the Russian government, because oftentimes the question becomes, was there contact with Russian officials? And I want to read you a brief quote from a book on Putin's government. This is by Professor Karen Dawisha, who wrote, "Instead of seeing Russian politics as an inchoate democratic system being pulled down by history, accidental autocrats, popular inertia, bureaucratic incompetence, or poor Western advice, I conclude that from the beginning, Putin and his circle sought to create an authoritarian regime ruled by a close-knit cabal who used democracy for decoration rather than direction." Mr. Comey, is it fair to say that the line that exists in the United States between government officers and government officials is blurred in Russia, that there may be oligarchs or other individuals who on the surface appear to be private citizens but who have connections to this close-knit cabal, who might be agents of influence or might be doing the Kremlin's bidding in contact with others?
That's fair to say, and one of our counterintelligence missions is to try to understand who are those people and are they acting on behalf of the Russian government, those Russian citizens.
Is it generally true that there is a category of Russian oligarchs that are likely part of this close-knit cabal?
In a general sense.
And if they go way back with Vladimir Putin, do the chances increase that they might be connected with the KGB, as asserted by Professor Dawisha?
The longevity of the association can be a consideration.
And the KGB was the Russian intelligence service under the Soviet Union, right?
Correct.
And the Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union.
Correct.
Right. I'll just observe, Rinat Akhmetov, a steel and iron ore magnate or oligarch, is the richest man in Ukraine and a strong Putin ally. He was the one who reportedly recommended Paul Manafort to Yanukovych. Mr. Comey, last set of questions for me. I have a report that appeared in CNN yesterday. The headline is, former Trump campaign chief Paul Manafort wanted for questioning in Ukraine corruption case. And I raise this with you because the story is told of Paul Manafort acting on behalf of Ukraine's former justice minister, Alexander Lavrinovich, who was the justice minister under the previous pro-Russian regime, who, and I'll just read a segment from this story here, who was involved in jailing the former prime minister, Timoshenko, who was the main political rival of the Kremlin-backed President Viktor Yanukovych, whom Manafort advised until he was deposed in 2014. Timoshenko was released from jail at the same time that Yanukovych was ousted. Many saw her sentencing as politically motivated by the pro-Russian government. In response to the deteriorating international climate, Ukrainian prosecutors say Manafort drafted a public relations strategy that included hiring Skadden Arps, an American law firm, to review the Timoshenko case and show the conviction had a sound legal basis. The story goes on to talk about the transfer of over $1 million, potentially illegally, from Ukrainian coffers to Skadden Arps. And the reason I bring all this up with you is because the story also says, and it appears to have been confirmed by the Department of Justice, that the current Ukraine regime, hardly a friend of the Russians and very much targeted by the Russians, has made 7 requests to the United States government for assistance under the MLA treaty in securing the assistance of Paul Manafort as part of this anti-corruption case. And in fact, the story says that you were presented personally with a letter asking for that assistance. So my question, Director Comey, is that all true? Have you been asked to provide assistance to the current Ukrainian government with respect to Paul Manafort, and how do you intend to respond to that request?
That's not something I can comment on. I can say generally we have a very strong relationship and cooperation in the criminal and national security areas with our Ukrainian partners, but I can't talk about the particular matter.
The story says that the DOJ confirmed that there have been requests for assistance on this matter. You can't go as far as confirming that, in fact, there have been these requests made?
If they've done that, I would need them to do it again. I can't comment on it.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And with that, I will yield back the remainder of my time to the ranking member.
And I yield to Terry Sewell.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. My questions this morning really revolve around the resignation of the former National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn. Director Comey, much has been made about Russia's historical interference with political elections around the world, meant to cause discord and disunity, especially in Western alliances. Does the FBI generally assume that Russian ambassadors to the United States, like Ambassador Kislyak, are at least overtly collecting intelligence on influential Americans, especially political leaders?
Ms. Sewell, that's not something I can answer in an open setting.
Am I right that in the Russian playbook, that it's in the Russian playbook to use diplomats and business people and Russian intelligence officers, whether declared or not, to collect intelligence on influential Americans for the purpose of affecting U.S. policy?
I can answer as a general matter. Nation states that are adversaries of the United States use traditional intelligence officers, sometimes use intelligence officers operating under diplomatic cover, use people we call co-optees, maybe private citizens, students, academics, business people. All manner of human beings can be used in an intelligence collection operation, but I'm not going to talk about the particular.
Would someone like Ambassador Kislyak play that type of role for Russia?
I can't say here.
The declassified January Intelligence Community Assessment Report that your agency helped to draft, the report that's entitled Assessing Russian Activities and Intentions in the Recent U.S. Elections, specifically states that, quote, since the Cold War, Russian intelligence efforts related to the United States elections have primarily focused on foreign intelligence collections that could help Russian leaders understand a new U.S. administration's plans and priorities, end quote. So knowing what we know about Russia's efforts and the role of the Russian ambassador, Director Comey, would you be concerned if any one of your agents had a private meeting with the Russian ambassador?
If an FBI agent had a private meeting with a Russian government employee of any kind, it would be concerning, and I assume by private, one that's not disclosed or part of their operational activity.
That's
Yes.
right.
Yes.
And would you expect that agent to report that meeting?
Yes.
Admiral Rogers, a similar question. Would you be concerned if one of your intelligence officers had a private meeting with the Russian ambassador, and would you expect that intelligence officer to report that meeting?
Disclosures of interactions with foreign governments is a requirement for all our employees, to include myself, for example.
I ask these questions because on at least 4 occasions that I can count, Mr. Flynn, a 3-star general and a former intelligence officer, someone with influence over the U.S. policy, and someone with knowledge of state secrets, and the incoming national security advisor communicated with and met with the Russian ambassador and failed to disclose it. So I ask you, directors, if you wouldn't stand for your own staff to do this, why should we, the American people, accept Michael Flynn doing it?
Ms. Sewell, I'll let Mike Rogers take it next, but I can't speak to what the disclosure obligations are for other people in the government, so it's hard for me to answer that. I can answer, and I answered, I hope accurately, with respect to one of the FBI special agents.
And I likewise would answer the same way in terms of the NSA.
Gentleman's time has expired. I'll yield myself 15 minutes. Director Comey, you announced this morning that there'll be an investigation into Trump associates, possible, and President Trump and anyone around the campaign and any association with the Russian government. If this committee, or anyone else for that matter, someone from the public, comes with information to you about the Hillary Clinton campaign, or their associates, or someone from the Clinton Foundation, will you add that to your investigation? They have ties to Russian intelligence services, Russian agents. Would that be something of interest to you?
People bring us information about what they think is improper, unlawful activity of any kind, we will evaluate it. Not just in this context. Folks send us stuff all the time. They should keep doing that.
Do you think it's possible that the Russians would not be trying to infiltrate Hillary Clinton's campaign, get information on Hillary Clinton, and try to get to people that are around that campaign or the Clinton Foundation?
I'm not prepared to comment about the particular campaigns, but the Russians in general are always trying to understand who the future leaders might be and what levers of influence there might be on them.
I just hope that if information does surface about the other campaigns, not even just Hillary Clinton's, but any other campaigns, that you would take that serious also if the Russians were trying to infiltrate those campaigns around them.
Of course we would.
Okay, I'll yield to Mr. Conaway.
Thanks, Chairman. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. Admiral Rogers, you mentioned analytic standards earlier in the conversation. Are those standards the same for all intelligence analysts across the various agencies?
There's a broad set of intelligence community promulgated standards for all of us, and then there are specific issues associated, for example, with a particular authority that you're using to collect the information in the first place.
So, Jim, the same thing with your agency, your analysts would have similar type standards?
Correct. That's one of the really good things that's happened since 9/11, especially since 2004, is the adoption of a common set of tradecraft provisions.
So I'm a CPA, and we have generally accepted accounting standards, which are promulgated across a variety of things. Are those same standards publicly promulgated, or but generally disseminated through all of your analysts? I would assume would have some sort of a test that they know those standards?
I think the specifics of the IC promulgated standards are classified, but I could take that one for the record, sir.
When the IC attributes a hacking to a particular actor, you do that through generally forensic evidence. But when it comes to trying to determine intent of foreign leaders, can you walk us through how the NSA does that or the FBI does that?
We assess the range of information that we've collected in an attempt to generate understanding as to not only what has occurred, but part of the intelligence profession is also trying to understand why, what was the intent. We'll use the range of information we have available to us while we're primarily a single source organization. It's one reason why organizations like CIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, which take multiple sources to try to put together a complete picture. So we're just one component of a broader effort.
Director Comey, anything different than that?
No, it's about putting together a puzzle, sometimes from Forensics alone, you can get a pretty good indication as to what they must be intending to accomplish. Other times it requires human sources and additional signals intelligence to give you that sense.
So both of you agree, though, it's rarely a precise art or a precise science of determining intent of any foreign leader.
That's correct. All of intelligence
Judgment.
work requires judgment. That's at the center of it.
But I will say in some cases, it's a much clearer case than in others. There are some places
That depends, I
where
guess,
it's
on
very
the
clear.
sources you have inside a particular foreign leader's shop.
I'm not going to get into specifics.
Well, it's just in general. If you had somebody who's next door neighbor, never mind. Pivoting to the January 6th intelligence community assessment, both your agencies agree with the assessment that the Russians' goal was to undermine the public faith in the U.S. democratic process. Is that still your assessment?
Yes.
Same assessment said that the Russians' goal was wanted to denigrate Secretary Clinton and harm her electability and potential presidency, and that Putin wanted to discredit Secretary Clinton because he publicly blamed her since 2011 for inciting mass protests against his regime in late 2011 and early 2012. You both still agree with that assessment?
Yes.
Yes.
And then finally, Admiral Rogers, that assessment went on to say that President Putin and the Russian government aspire to help President, I guess it had been candidate Trump at the time, but President-elect Trump's election chances when possible by discrediting Secretary Clinton. You had a lower
Confidence
level. Is that still the case?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell the group why you were...
I'm not going to get into the specifics in unclassified form, but for me, it boiled down to the level and nature of the sourcing on that one particular judgment was slightly different to me than the others.
All right.
To be clear, Mr. Conaway,
We all
agreed with that
Right,
judgment.
we all agreed
Right.
with
Yeah,
the
but you really agreed, and he almost really agreed.
Not terms our folks use, but I
got
get
a
it.
term of art. I got you. Director Comey, in terms of laying out those three assessments and whether or not the IC was consistent in its view of those three assessments across the entire campaign, can we walk through kind of the FBI's walk down that path? As of early December of 2016, did the FBI assess that the active measures were to undermine, by the Russians were to undermine the faith in the U.S. democratic process? Did you come to that conclusion by early December?
I think that's right, December of last year.
16, yes, sir.
I think we were at that point, yes.
And then active measures conducted against Secretary Clinton to denigrate her, hurt her campaign, and also undermine her presidency.
Correct.
All right. And then the conclusion that active measures were taken specifically to help President Trump's campaign. You had that by early December, you already had that conclusion?
Correct. That they wanted to hurt our democracy, hurt her, help him. I think all three we were confident in at least as early as December.
Okay. The paragraph that's given me a little concern there in terms of just the timing of when all of that occurred, because I'm not sure if we went back and got that exact same January assessment 6 months earlier, it would have looked the same, because you say, when we further assess, Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for President-elect Trump. Any idea when that clear preference in the analysis, when did that get into the lexicon of when you talking back and forth among yourselves on a classified basis?
I don't know for sure, but I think that was a fairly easy judgment for the community. Putin hated Secretary Clinton so much that the flip side of that coin was he had a clear preference for the person running against the person he hated so much.
Yeah, and that might work on Saturday afternoon when my wife's Red Raiders are playing the Texas Longhorns. She really likes the Red Raiders. But all the rest of the time, I mean, the logic is that because he really didn't like the candidate Clinton, that he automatically liked Trump. That assessment's based on what?
Well, it's based on more than that, but part of it is, and we're not going to get into the details of it here, but part of it is the logic. Whoever the Red Raiders are playing, you want the Red Raiders to win. By definition, you want their opponent to lose.
I know, but this says that you wanted both of them, you wanted her to lose, wanted him to win. Is that
Right, they're
what you were saying?
inseparable. Right? It's a two-person
Right.
event.
I got you. So I'm just wondering when you decided you wanted him to win.
Well, logically, when he wanted her to lose, he wanted her.
No, I'm not talking about him. I got that. But the question is, when in this clear, well, then let me finish up then. So you go through that sentence about the clear preference for Donald Trump, and we don't know exactly when you guys decided that was the case. Then it says, when it appeared to Moscow that Secretary Clinton was likely to win the election, the Russian influence campaign then focused on undermining her expected presidency. So, and then the next sentence says, the Russian government aspired to help President-elect Trump election chances. So when did they not think she was going to win?
Well, the assessment of the intelligence community was as the summer went on and the polls appeared to show that Secretary Clinton was going to win, the Russians sort of gave up and simply focused on trying to undermine her. It's your Red Raiders. You know they're not going to win, so you kind of hope key people on the other team get hurt so they're not such a tough opponent down the road. And so there was at some point...
So you believe that the FBI was consistent through early December and on that was the case, that they assessed that they really wanted Trump to win it and were working to have him win and her lose?
Yes, our analysts had a view that I don't believe changed from late fall through to the report on January 6th that it had those three elements.
All right. So then on December the 9th, well in advance of the January 6th deal, the Washington Post put out an article. Their lead sentence was that this, and again, CIA, they're not here today, but we hope to have them next week, concluded in a secret assessment that Russia intervened in the 2016 election to help Donald Trump win the presidency rather than to undermine the confidence in the electoral system. Rather than just undermine it. They don't mention Ms. Clinton at all. And then it says to help Trump get elected, the U.S. senior briefed on the intelligence position, the U.S. official briefed on the intelligence presentation to U.S. senators said that's the consensus view. How much did this is written by a guy named Adam Entos, Elaine something, and Greg Miller. Did they help draft the January 6th document for the Intel Committee?
I'm sorry?
Did those writers from the Washington Post help you write the January 6th assessment?
No, they did not.
I wonder how they got almost the exact language on December the 9th.
It hadn't been written yet. I don't know. This is the peril of trying to comment on newspaper articles that purport to report classified information. I can't say much about them. They're often wrong.
Yep. You mentioned earlier in one of our hearings that when anybody uses I can't talk because I'm bound by position of anonymity or whatever, that really is code for breaking the law, generally, right? When somebody says, I'm talking to a reporter, I'm just classifying secret information, you can't tell, the reporter can't tell who it is because, as Mr. Gowdy was saying earlier, speaking on the condition of anonymity, that really should be interpreted because I'm breaking the law and I don't want to be outed. Is that a fair statement?
Sometimes. I think there are other motives behind people requesting anonymity, but that can be one of them.
So it's your statement to us that then that the FBI was consistent in its assessment that they denigrate the U.S. electoral process, hurt Hillary and her potential candidacy, and concurrent across all of that, that they intended to help Trump. That's your testimony this morning?
Correct.
Thank you. Yield back.
Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Admiral Rogers, for being here today and for what I believe has been the cooperation you've always given this committee. So thank you very much for that and for your service. Director Comey, I think we're in a predicament here today. I understand your situation where you can't comment on the investigation, and yet we can have various scenarios laid out which could go on for months and months and months without anyone being able to disprove them until the investigation is completed. I would just like to use the example. For instance, we could have said that in 2012, President Obama was overheard on a microphone telling Medvedev that if I'm reelected, tell Vladimir we can work out better arrangements. We know that he ridiculed candidate Romney in the 2012 election when Romney said that he thought Russia was still a threat. And then in 2013, we saw that basically President Obama invited the Russians into Syria when they've been pretty much removed from the Middle East 40 years before. And also, as far as aid to Ukraine, as far as I recall, the Obama administration always refused to give lethal aid to Ukraine. And it can be argued that the Republican platform in 2016 was actually stronger than the Democratic platform on that. So again, if there was an investigation going on of the Obama administration, we could lay out all these scenarios and say, well, that proves something, or it might prove something. And until the investigation was completed, that type of almost possibly slanderous comments could be made. So I would just, again, if I'm not asking you to hurry the investigation along, you have to do what you have to do, but I guess I could ask you just in the remaining moments I have in this round. I know that, I guess it was just 2 weeks ago, that Director Clapper said that as far as he knows, all the evidence he's seen, there's no evidence of any collusion at all between the Trump campaign and the Russians. Now, obviously, a detailed, exhaustive report was put out talking about Russian influence in the campaign. All of the intelligence apparatus had input into that. Do either you or Admiral Rogers have any reason to disagree with the conclusion of General Clapper that there's no evidence of collusion between the Russians and the Trump campaign?
Mr. King, it's not something I can comment on.
Likewise, I'm not going to comment on an ongoing investigation's conclusions.
But again, you're not going to disagree with General Clapper, you're just not going to comment. And the reason I'm pointing that out is that's sort of the situation, the other way around, that when you can't comment on something, often there's an inference out there that because a person's name is brought up, because he may have worked for somebody at a certain time, that there's a guilt implied in that. So that's the problem. I'm not in any way being critical of either of you. I'm just saying this is a situation which I think can be damaging to the country and does advance the Russian interests of trying to destabilize democracy and cause a lack of confidence in our system. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. I recognize Mr. Schiff for 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a couple of follow-up questions before I pass to Representative Sewell. It wasn't simply that the Russians had a negative preference against Secretary Clinton. They also had a positive preference for Donald Trump. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
And I want to ask you to say whether this is an accurate characterization of Mr. Trump. I won't put you in that spot. But would it be logical for the Kremlin to prefer a candidate that disparaged NATO to be President of the United States?
You're not going to put me in that spot, you said?
Yes.
I'm happy with that. I'm happy with that.
I'm not going to put you in the spot of answering whether this is an accurate characterization of Mr. Trump's views, but it would be logical for the Kremlin to want someone who had a dim view of NATO. Is that right?
All kidding aside, I don't think that's something I should be answering. I mean, that's beyond my responsibilities.
Well, what is the Russian view of NATO? Do they like NATO? Do they want to see NATO strong?
Well, again, I'm sure you have already spoken to people who are greater experts than I, but yeah, they don't like NATO. They think NATO encircles them and threatens them.
And would they have a preference for a candidate that expressed an openness to repealing the sanctions over Ukraine?
And I don't want to get into business of commenting on that. I know.
Well, then let me ask you this way, Director. Would they like to see the sanctions on Ukraine go away?
Yes.
Would they have a preference for a candidate who expressed open admiration for Putin?
And I hope you'll reformulate the question. Mr. Putin would like people who like him.
Would they have a preference for a candidate who encouraged Brexit and other departures from Europe? Would they like to see more Brexits?
Yes.
And have the Russians in Europe demonstrated a preference for business people as political leaders with the hope that they can entangle them in financial interests, or that they may allow their financial interests to take precedence over the interests of the countries in Europe they represent?
In our joint report, we recount that the Russians, that President Putin has expressed a preference for business leaders in leading other governments, and mentions Gerhard Schroeder and, I'm going to forget one, Berlusconi, because he believes they're people that are more open to negotiation, easier to deal with.
At this point, let me yield to Representative Sewell.
I'd like to continue my questioning, the line of questioning on Michael Flynn. I'm sure you can understand my concern that Mr. Flynn not only failed to disclose the contacts with the Russian ambassador, but he said he did not remember whether he discussed sanctions against Russia with that ambassador. And I find that really hard to believe. And wouldn't you think that at the height of our concern about Russian hacking, that Mr. Flynn would have remembered meeting with the Russian ambassador and would have told him to stop meddling in our affairs? But that didn't happen, did it?
So that's not something I can answer.
Not only did Mr. Flynn not remember talking to the Russian ambassador, and not only did he not remember what they talked about, he also appeared to have lied to Vice President-elect Mike Pence all about it. Now, Mr. Comey, do you think that Mr. Flynn's failure to disclose the communication and contact he had with the Russian ambassador and their topic of conversation, along with a blatant lie to Vice President Pence, meet the standard for an investigation by the FBI?
I have to give you the same answer. I'm not going to comment.
Now, I know, Director Comey, that you probably can't comment on this as well, but I think it's really important that we review a short timeline and that's based on press reportings because we need to get this for the public record, I think. So on December 25th, 2016, Mr. Flynn reportedly exchanged text messages with the Russian ambassador. On December 28th, 2016, Mr. Flynn reportedly spoke on the phone with the Russian ambassador. By then, it was pretty clear that the Obama administration was going to take actions against Russia. On December 29th, 2016, Mr. Flynn reportedly spoke on the phone with the Russian ambassador again. That day, the Obama administration expelled 35 Russian operatives from the United States and announced new sanctions. We also know from press reportings that sometime in December, Mr. Flynn met in person with the Russian ambassador at Trump Tower, and that Mr. Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, was also there. The purpose of the meeting was to, quote, establish a line of communication, end quote, with the Kremlin. I should add that the White House and Mr. Flynn didn't disclose this December face-to-face meeting until this month. On January 12th, 2017, press reported that Mr. Flynn contacted the Russian ambassador again. And on January 15th, 2015, Vice President-elect Mike Pence stated on several Sunday morning shows regarding Mr. Flynn's conversation with the ambassador, quote, "What I can confirm, having spoken to him about it, is that those conversations that happened to occur around the time that the United States took action to expel diplomats had nothing whatsoever to do with those sanctions," end quote. On January 26th, the acting Attorney General Sally Yates reportedly told President Trump's White House counsel, who immediately told President Trump, that Mr. Flynn was vulnerable to Russian blackmail because of discrepancies between Vice President-elect Pence's public statement and Mr. Flynn's actual discussions. On February 10th, President Trump denied knowledge of this, telling reporters on Air Force One, quote, "I don't know about that," end quote, in response to questions about Mr. Flynn's conduct. The White House also publicly denied that Mr. Flynn and the Russian ambassador discussed sanctions. And of course, on February 13th, 2017, Mr. Flynn resigned as National Security Advisor. Now, Director Comey, all of these accounts are open source press reportings. Given Russia's longstanding desire to cultivate relations with influential U.S. persons, isn't the American public right to be concerned about Mr. Flynn's conduct, his failure to disclose that contact with the Russian ambassador, his attempts to cover it up, and what looks like the White House's attempts to sweep this under the rug? Don't we as the American people deserve the right to know? And shouldn't our FBI investigate such claims?
I can't comment. I understand people's curiosity about our work and intense interest in it, and as Mr. King said, oftentimes speculation about it, but we can't do it well or fairly to the people we investigate if we talk about it, so I can't comment.
I'd like to turn to another topic about Mr. Flynn. His failure to disclose until pressured last week by my colleagues on the House Oversight and Government Relations Committee, Government Reforms Committee, payments he received from Russia for his 2015 trip to the 10th anniversary gala of RT, the Russian-owned propaganda media outlet. According to the January 2017 declassified IC assessment report, RT's criticism of the United States was, quote, "the last facet of its broader and longstanding anti-U.S. messaging likely aimed at undermining viewers' trust in the U.S. democratic procedures, end quote. This January assessment points out that this was a strategy that Russia employed going back to before the 2012 elections, according to the IC assessment. So, Admiral Rogers, am I right that the RT is essentially owned by the Russian government? And how long has the intelligence community been looking at RT as an arm of the Russian government?
So we're certainly aware and have been for some period of time of the direct connections between the Russian government and RT individuals. We're aware of monetary flow and other things.
And how long have you known about that? A few months, a few years? I mean, how long has the United States...
Some number of years. I apologize, ma'am. I just don't know off the top of my head.
Aren't I right to assume then that the former director of DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, Mr. Flynn, would have been aware that RT's role as an anti-U.S. Russian propaganda outlet when he agreed to speak at their anniversary gala in 2015? Isn't it reasonable to assume that he would know?
I'm not in a position to comment on the knowledge of something else from another person, ma'am.
Director Comey, would it be unusual for a foreign government official to get paid by a foreign adversary to attend such an event? And would it be unusual and raise some questions at the FBI if that person failed to disclose the payments received for that trip?
I don't know in general, and as to the specific, I'm just not going to comment.
Yes, sir. I understand that you can't comment, but I'd like to read an exchange between Mr. Flynn and a Yahoo News correspondent from July 2016 regarding his trip to Russia during the RT event. The correspondent asked, "Were you paid for that event?" Then there was back and forth for a bit, and then Mr. Flynn said, quote, "Yeah, I didn't take any money from Russia, if that's what you're asking me," end quote. So, Director Comey, isn't it true that the House Oversight Committee last week received information and released publicly that Mr. Flynn accepted nearly $35,000 in speaking fees and traveling fees from RT, this Russian government-owned media outlet?
I believe I've seen news accounts to that effect.
Moreover, isn't it also true that according to the Emoluments Clause of the United States Constitution, a person holding any office of profit or trust cannot accept gifts or payments from a foreign country? And doesn't the DoD, the Department of Defense, prohibit retired military officers from taking any consulting fees, gifts, traveling expenses, honorariums, or salary from a foreign government, including commercial enterprises owned by or controlled by a foreign government, like RT?
It's not something I can comment on.
Can you speak to whether or not the Emoluments Clause would apply to someone like Mr. Flynn, a retired three-star general?
I can't.
So isn't it, I just find it to be really hard to believe that given the Emoluments Clause does apply to retired officers like Mr. Flynn, I can't believe that Mr. Flynn, a retired military officer, would take money from the Russian government in violation of the United States Constitution. And I believe that such violations worthy of a criminal investigation by the FBI. What level of proof do we need in order for us to have a criminal investigation by the FBI of Mr. Flynn?
I can't comment on that.
Shouldn't the American people be concerned? I think that it's really hard for us to fathom that he wouldn't know that he should have disclosed that he received $35,000 as a part of a speaking engagement to RT, the Russian U.S. anti-propaganda outlet.
I can't comment on that, Ms. Sewell.
My final line of questioning is in regard to Mr. Flynn working as an agent of a foreign power. Now, Director Comey, following on Mr. Himes's line of questioning, am I correct that the Foreign Agents Registration Act requires that individuals who lobby on behalf of a foreign government must register with the United States government?
I believe that's correct. I know I keep saying I'm not an expert. The reason I'm saying that is I don't know exactly how they define things like lobbying in the statute, but as a general matter, if you're going to represent a foreign government here in the United States touching our government, you should be registered.
And isn't it true that just last November 2016, Mr. Flynn was working as a foreign agent doing work that principally benefited the government of Turkey, and yet he didn't report it until just last week?
I can't comment on that.
Isn't it true that Mr. Flynn was reportedly paid over $500,000 for this work?
Same answer.
And isn't it true that the Trump White House, on at least 2 occasions, was asked by Mr. Flynn's lawyers whether he should report that work, the work that he was doing on behalf of the Turkish government, and yet the administration didn't give him any advice to the contrary? Do you know anything about that?
I have to give you the same answer.
So, Director Comey, I know you cannot discuss whether any investigations are ongoing with U.S. persons, and I respect that. I think it's important, though, that the American people understand the scope and breadth of what, in public, open source press reportings of Mr. Flynn's actions that led to his resignation. And while we can't talk about whether there are an investigation, I believe that we here at HPSI, at the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, must put those facts into the public domain. And they are, 1, that Mr. Flynn lied about his communication with the Russian ambassador. Secondly, that Mr. Flynn lied about taking money from the Russian government. And thirdly, that Mr. Flynn, at a minimum, did not disclose work as an agent of a foreign power, and that the White House did not help in this concern. So, gentlemen, it's clear to me that Mr. Flynn should be under criminal investigation, and I know you cannot comment, but I believe it is my duty as a member of this committee to comment to the American people that his engagement of lying and failure to disclose really important information and contacts with a foreign ambassador do rise to the level of disclosure and, to me, criminal intent. So I say this to say that the American people deserve to know the full extent of Mr. Flynn's involvement with the Russians and the extent to which it influenced the 2016 election. I believe our democracy requires it. Thank you. I yield back to my ranking member.
Time's expired. Recognize myself for 15 minutes. Mr. Comey and Mr. Rogers, you both said that the Russians they favored Donald Trump in this election, and you made that change from the beginning of December. It was not that they were trying to help Donald Trump, but that changed by early January. Mr. Conaway talked about that. Do Russians...
I don't agree with that. I'm going to make sure I didn't misspeak earlier. We didn't change our view from December to early January. We, the FBI, and I don't know that anybody else did on the IC team.
I mean, from my perspective, we didn't have a fully formed review until the end of December.
At some point, the assessment changed
January 7th report.
from going from just trying to hurt Hillary Clinton to know that they were actually trying to help Donald Trump get elected. That was early December as far as I know, and then by January, you had all changed your mind on that.
Well, that's not my recollection, Mr.
Not
Chair.
my recollection either, sir.
Okay, so do Russians historically prefer Republicans to win over Democrats?
I don't know the answer to that.
Did the Russians prefer Mitt Romney over Barack Obama in 2012?
I don't know that we ever drew a formal analytic conclusion.
Did the Russians prefer John McCain in 2008 over Barack Obama?
I never saw a U.S. intelligence community analytic position on that issue.
Don't you think it's ridiculous to say that, for anyone to say that the Russians prefer Republicans over Democrats?
I didn't think that that's what you just heard us say. I apologize, sir.
I hope you didn't hear us to say that. We don't know in those particular races, and I'm not qualified enough.
I'm just asking a general question. I mean, wouldn't it be a little preposterous to say that historically, going back to Ronald Reagan and all that we know about maybe who the Russians would prefer, that somehow the Russians prefer Republicans over Democrats?
There is, I'm not going to discuss it in an unclassified form, in the classified segment of the reporting version that we did, there is some analysis that discusses this, because remember, this did come up in our assessment on the Russian piece. I'm not going to discuss this in unclassified form.
Mr. King,
Hey, Mr. Chairman, and I would just say on that, because again, without going into the classified sections, that indicating that historically Russians have supported Republicans, and I know that language is there, to me puts somewhat of a cloud over the entire report. It seems to indicate the direction it was going in. But anyway, let me just say this for the record, and I know what your answer is going to be, but I have to get the statement on the record. On March 15th, former acting director of CIA, Mike Morell, who was the acting director under President Obama, and put it on the record, I've had differences with Mike Morell in the past, but he was asked about the question of the Trump campaign conspiring with the Russians. And his answer was, there is smoke, but there is no fire at all. There's no little campfire. There's no little candle. There's no spark. Do you agree with Mr. Morell?
I can't comment, Mr. King.
Admiral Rogers?
I'm not going to comment on an ongoing investigation.
And I understand that. That was my way of getting on the record, so I appreciate that. You were talking about the significance of leaks and how important it is we stop them. And to me, and I've been here a while, I've never seen such a sustained period of leaks. Going back to December when not the Intelligence Committee, but the Washington Post was told the conclusion of the report. That's number one. What it was going to be. We have situations in the New York Times where they talk of meetings, they talk about transcripts, they talk about conversations. There was one in particular where it spoke about Trump campaign individuals meeting with Russian intelligence agents. And again, Director Comey, I don't know if you can comment on this, but the White House Chief of Staff said, I guess that day or the next day, that Mr. McCabe from your office went to him at the White House and told him that that story was BS. Is there any way you can comment on whether or not Mr. McCabe told that to Mr. Priebus?
I can't, Mr. King, but I can agree with your general premise. Leaks have always been a problem. I read over the weekend something from George Washington and Abraham Lincoln complaining about them. But I do think in the last 6 weeks, there's been at least apparently a lot of conversation about classified matters that's ending up in the media. Now, a lot of it is just dead wrong, which is one of the challenges because we don't correct it. But it does strike me there's been a lot of people talking, or at least reporters saying people are talking to them in ways that have struck me as unusually active.
Yeah, so I fully understand the media's fascination with palace intrigue, with which faction at the White House is trying to outdo the other. That's all. To me, that's all legitimate. That goes with the game. But if you're talking about leaking classified information, if you're talking about leaking investigations, you stated today that there is an FBI investigation going on. So if the New York Times can be believed, I would think it would have to be somebody from the FBI who was telling them about these purported meetings, which Mr. McCabe said was BS, with Russian intelligence agencies. So somebody who was familiar with that investigation spoke to the New York Times. And so I'll use that as an example. And also one where, to me, there's a smaller universe. I think it was on January 6th when yourself, Admiral Rogers, Director Brennan, and General Clapper went to Trump Tower to meet with President Trump. The media reports are that at the end of that meeting, Director Comey, you presented President-elect Trump with a copy of the now infamous or famous dossier. And I don't know how many people were in the room, but within hours, that was leaked to the media, and that gave the media the excuse or the rationale to publish almost the entire dossier. Does that violate any law? I mean, you were at a classified briefing with the President-elect of the United States, and it had to be a very, very small universe of people who knew that you handed them that dossier, and it was leaked out within hours. Are you making any effort to find out who leaked it, and do you believe that that constituted a criminal violation?
I can't say, Mr. King, except I can answer in general.
Yeah.
Any unauthorized disclosure of classified conversations or documents is potentially a violation of the law and a serious, serious problem. I've spent most of my career trying to figure out unauthorized disclosures, where they came from. It's very, very hard. Oftentimes, it doesn't come from the people who actually know the secrets. It comes from one hop out, people who heard about it or were told about it. And that's the reason so much information that purports to be accurate classified information is actually wrong in the media, because the people who heard about it didn't hear about it right. But It is an enormous problem whenever you find information that is actually classified in the media. We don't talk about it because we don't want to confirm it, but I do think it should be investigated aggressively and, if possible, prosecuted so people take as a lesson this is not okay. This behavior can be deterred, and it's deterred by locking some people up who have engaged in criminal activity.
Well, could you say it was obviously Admiral Rogers was in the room, you were in the room, General Clapper was in the room, and Director Brennan was in the room. Were there any other people in the room that could have leaked that out? I mean, this isn't a report that was circulated among 20 people. This is an unmasking of names where you may have 20 people in the NSA and 100 people in the FBI. It's not putting together a report or all the intelligence agency. This is 4 people in a room with the President-elect of the United States. And I don't know who else was in that room. And that was leaked out, it seemed within minutes or hours of you handing him that dossier. And it was so confidential, if you read the media reports, that you actually handed it to him separately. So, and believe me, I'm not saying it's you. I'm saying it's a small universe of people that would have known about that. And if it is a disclosure of classified information, if you're going to start with investigating leaks, to me that would be one place where you could really start to narrow it down.
And again, Mr. King, I can't comment because I do not ever want to confirm a classified conversation with a president or president-elect. I can tell you in my general experience, it often turns out there are more people who know about something than you expected at first, both because there may be more people involved in the thing than you realize, not this particular, but in general, and more people have been told about it or heard about it or staff have been briefed on it, and those echoes are, in my experience, what most often ends up being shared with reporters.
Well, could you tell us who else was in the room that day?
I'm sorry?
Could you tell us who else was in the room with you that day?
No, because I'm not going to confirm that there was such a conversation, because then I might accidentally confirm something that was in the newspaper.
But could you tell us who was in the room, whether or not there was a conversation?
No, I'm not confirming there was a conversation. In a classified setting, I might be able to share more with you, but I'm not going to confirm any conversations with either President Obama or President Trump, or when President Trump was the president-elect.
Well, not the conversation or even the fact that you gave it to him, but can you tell us who was in the room for that briefing that you gave?
That you're saying later ended up in the newspaper.
Yes.
So my talking about who was in the room would be a confirmation that what was in the newspaper was classified information. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to help people who did something that is unauthorized.
Yeah, but we all know that the 4 of you went to Trump Tower for the briefing. I mean, that's not classified, is it?
How do we all know that, though?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, you can see the predicament we're in here.
No, I get it. I get it. But we are duty-bound to protect classified information, both in the first, when we get it, and then to make sure we don't accidentally jeopardize classified information by what we say about something that appears in the media.
Well, if they're listening, I would just advise that Director Clapper and Director Brennan will be asking them the same questions next week, and perhaps they can give us some answers. Chairman, I get back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Testimony.
Mr. Lobiondo is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Comey, Admiral Rogers, thank you for your service, and thank you for being here. Understanding that what both of you have been saying about the classified nature of the investigation, the classified nature of the topics we're talking about, can you give us any indication of when we, the committee, may, in a classified setting, know something from you? Would we have ongoing updates?
Mr. Lobiondo, I don't know how long the work will take. I can't commit to updates. As you know, I have briefed the committee as a whole on some aspects of our work, and I've briefed in great detail the chair and the ranking. I don't know, I can't predict or commit to updates. But as your work goes on, we're in constant touch with you, and we'll do the best we can, but I can't commit to that as I sit here.
So as the House Intelligence Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee are conducting our bipartisan investigations and looking wherever it may lead with individuals or circumstances, if you, through the FBI investigation, come across a circumstance with an individual or a situation, would we be made aware of that under normal course of business?
Not necessarily, but it's possible.
Okay. So can you, either Director Comey or Admiral Rogers, tell us what we are doing or what we should be doing to protect against Russian interference in future elections? or any meddling with our government, or for that matter, any state sponsor, Iranians, North Koreans, Chinese, with any meddling they may be doing?
So first, I think a public discussion and acknowledgement of the activity is a good positive first step because it shines a flashlight on this, if you will. It illuminates a significant issue that I think we all have to deal with. There's a variety of ongoing efforts, both within the government as well in the private sector, in terms of how do we harden our defenses. I think we also need to have a discussion about just what, for example, does critical infrastructure mean in the 21st century? I don't think we traditionally would have thought of an election infrastructure as critical. We traditionally viewed critical infrastructure as something that generated an industrial output, aviation, electricity, finance. I don't think we've traditionally thought about it in the informational kind of dynamic. I think that's a challenge for us coming ahead. And then continued partnership between the elements within the government as well as in the private sector. That's the key to the future to me.
So just for the record, I also had a whole list of specific questions about individuals and/or circumstances that don't want to be repetitive and have you say, I can't comment on them, but I would anticipate when we move to classified session that this committee will be able to explore some of those situations in a little more depth. I have a couple of other questions about the Russian intervention, but I don't have enough time to get into it right now, Mr. If you could give me a couple minutes when we get to the next round. Okay, so very briefly, if you can describe the elements of Russia's active measures in the campaign in the 2016 election. We've only got 35 seconds, but that's the first thing I want to get into about exactly what they were doing, if you can tell us anything about that.
So we saw cyber used. We saw the use of external media. We saw the use of disinformation. We saw the use of leaking of information, much of which was not altered. I mean, we saw several, if you will, common traits that we have both seen over time, as well as I would argue that the difference this time was the cyber dimension and the fact that the release of so much information that they had extracted via cyber is a primary tool to try to drive an outcome.
So in this setting, can you talk to us at all about what tools they used?
I'm not going to go into the specifics of how they executed the hacks. I apologize, no, sir.
We'll try to get into that in classified. I'll hold off for now. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Schiff's recognized for 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had a couple of follow-up questions. Director Comey, can you tell me what an SF-86 is?
SF-86?
Yes.
It's the standard background clearance form that all of us who are hired by the federal government and want to have access to classified information fill out.
Would someone who is an incoming national security advisor have to fill out an SF-86?
Yes, I think so.
Would that SF-86 require that the applicant disclose any payments received from a foreign power?
I think so. I mean, the form is the form. I think so, and foreign travel as well.
I'd make a request through you to the Justice Department or whatever IC component would have custody of Mr. Flynn's SF-86. I'd make a request that that be provided to the committee. And I yield now to Mr. Carson.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I'd like to focus my line of questioning on Russia's views toward Ukraine. In March 2014, Russia illegally annexed the Ukrainian territory of Crimea, beginning a conflict which has effectively yet to be resolved. Admiral Rogers, can you please briefly describe, as you understand it, sir, how Russia took Crimea?
I would argue to the insertion of military force. They occupied it and physically removed it from Ukrainian control.
Sir, we've heard terms like little green men and hybrid warfare. Can you please explain how these relate to Russia in Ukraine?
So on the Ukraine side, what we saw was over time, rather than the kind of overt kind of activity we saw to such a degree on the Crimea side, what we saw was a much bigger effort on the influence and the attempts to distance Russian actions from any potential blowback to the Russian state, if you will, and hence the use of the little green men, surrogates in military, unmarked military uniforms,